Well, we can get started here. Let's see. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining. I'm Chantal from Demandwell, and I'm super excited to welcome Egan and Molly to this session on how go-to-market can impact the efficiency of your marketing program. Utilize the Q&A throughout here because we're going to be trying to answer questions in real time as they come up. So feel free to just drop things in the Q&A and we'll be keeping an eye on that and managing it. Molly and Egan, do you want to introduce yourselves?
Yeah, hi. My name is Molly Kermoto. I'm a senior brand marketing manager here at High Alpha, and I'll let Egan introduce himself.
Hey everyone, Egan Montgomery, Director of Go-to-Market at High Alpha.
Fantastic. Awesome. Yeah, I guess we'll just kind of dive in. So before we start, I will just say I thought some of those answers were pretty funny to how you would define go-to-market. I was hoping for some slightly cynical ones, and you guys did not let me down. So I appreciate that. I got a good laugh. But a little bit about High Alpha. So Egan and I both work at a company, a venture studio called High Alpha, and we create and fund B2B SaaS companies. So just to know where we're coming from and what our perspective is, I think it's helpful to explain what we do for a living. At High Alpha, there are two parts to the story. First, we create companies with world-class co-founders. One example of a company we started actually alongside an awesome co-founder and CEO is Demandwell. So a few years back, we decided that this was a really great venture for us to co-found with Mitch. The second part of the story is that we fund companies. So our bread and butter is early stage B2B SaaS. High Alpha is an interesting place to work. So Egan and I both have the opportunity to work on the studio side, launching our baby companies out into the world. And the benefit here really is that we get to work with obviously a lot of awesome co-founders and early teams, but we also get to see the benefit of what works, what doesn't work for dozens of software companies. So to date, just for reference, High Alpha has launched over 40 SaaS companies, and we learn a little bit every time. So that's enough about High Alpha. And next, we're going to just talk a little bit about market. So right now for marketers and for businesses, I'm sure, as you all know, it's been a little rough. So a lot of founders and CEOs are really hot on efficiency. And the reason really being for that is that, especially for software, sorry, Chantal, can you go to the next slide? Great. Especially for software, it's a hard market to be in right now. So the focus is really largely impacted by market conditions. SaaS markets are down. What we're valuing companies at is also down. Cost of capital is up, and we're seeing really difficult funding environments. Lastly, a lot of investors in public markets are starting to actually prioritize metrics associated with associated with efficiency rather than growth, which is definitely a shift. So the question really is, how does this affect marketing, and how does this affect marketers? Essentially, as I'm sure you all feel, we're just being asked to do more with less. So hit the same goals you hit last year, maybe even exceed them with a tightened budget, smaller team, and fewer resources. I know this can be extremely frustrating. Before High Alpha, I was in a similar role of we were always trying to grow, and sometimes the budget, it makes it feel a little impossible. But really, it's because shifts in marketing can actually play a big role in capital efficiency overall in a business. So we'll get into some of the numbers in just a moment, but reducing marketing spend while increasing return on campaign spend and increasing conversion rates across the entire customer journey can lead to some really big results. And the bulk of our conversation in our presentation today is going to be on some of these metrics. But before we kind of get into that, I'm going to hand it off to Egan to showcase the kind of impact we're talking about, because I hope you'll see that it is substantial.
All right, so let's look at two examples here. And what we have is basically super generalized marketing and sales funnels, but I think you'll get the point. So at the top of each table, you'll see key milestones along the buying journey. And underneath that, you'll see corresponding conversion rates and then a projected average contract value, or ACV. In both options, we seed the top of the funnel with 10,000 website visitors. And the only difference in option 2 is we've added a reasonable bump in conversion rates at each stage. And the point of this slide is really to show the impact that even like modest increases in conversion rates can have on your revenue. So we bumped visit to lead up by 0.25%, lead to opportunity and opportunity to closed won by 5% each. And then we bumped average contract value up by 5K, from 25K to 30. And all of that equates to almost a 100% increase in revenue, 89% increase in revenue generated. So that is, a really meaningful kind of lift in total revenue, but from, what I think are reasonable increases in conversion rates at various points along the funnel. And one of the cool things about getting the foundations right is, improving who your customer is, or getting more specific about who your customer is, or making your messaging better, or improving one of your distribution channels can impact really every stage along the buying journey, versus, changing the button color on a landing page might increase your visit to lead, but it's likely not going to have as much of an impact all the way down the funnel. So that's, I think, important. These fundamental changes create impact kind of all throughout your go-to-market. Next slide, Chantal. I think oftentimes people are looking for a silver bullet when they're trying to do more with less, when they're trying to be more efficient. We're often in pursuit of some big idea that will inevitably propel a company to the next level. We think that we're a slide or a campaign or a hire away from radical performance increases. And that's not typically how we see it go down in our portfolio. Oftentimes, the big improvements come from just getting these fundamentals right. And the 6 fundamentals of go-to-market that we always talk about are ideal customer profile, or ICP, positioning, messaging, pricing and packaging, distribution, and retention. And for the purposes of today, we'll be focusing primarily on those first 4 bullet points. But if anyone wants to talk about distribution or retention later, please feel free to hit Molly or I up.
I love this slide. If I can just chime in right now, I feel like this is the answer, when we were asking in the chat, like, what does go-to-market mean to you? It's like, this basically captures it. It's like, who are you selling to? How is what you're selling different from other things they might have the option to buy? How are you explaining that to them? And then, like, what does it cost? And making sure all those things are like actually aligned with each other and for the audience that you're selling to. This is a great slide.
That's exactly right, Chantal. Okay, so, and like I said, improving one or a few of these, can have huge impacts on revenue, or kind of your North Star metrics. So when we talk about good fundamentals, what do we mean? I think Chantal did a nice job kind of recapping what the key points are. And oftentimes it's about focus and specificity and clarity and decisiveness. Where we see companies get in trouble is when they're targeting too many people, or the message is too vanilla, or the pricing and packaging is too convoluted. And efficiency comes from being more focused, being more clear. So, as a marketer, so the executive team knows, and so that your customers know that what you have is specifically for them. And we thought, like, that's kind of the theory behind all of this, but the best way to demonstrate it is by showing a real example. So most of the rest of this presentation will be a company that Molly and I worked on for a long time called The Juice. Drop in a comment if you've ever heard of The Juice, and if you're a customer, definitely show them some love. Molly and I spent time with their team getting the download on how they use go-to-market fundamentals to get themselves out of what was a really bad situation. They were super open with us about their shortcomings, and I'm grateful that they're letting us tell this story now to a bunch of marketers. But the process that they went through to get things turned around after a really rough quarter, I think is it's a cool story that I'm excited to share. So a little context setting first. There were a number of companies that Molly and I had in mind for this example. We ended up going with The Juice because we thought they'd be the most relatable to this audience. For one thing, they're marketing tech, and you're all marketers, so I think you'll relate to kind of the process. But more importantly, The Juice is at kind of a unique stage where they're small enough that I think many of the really young startups will be able to relate to them, but they're also big enough that, some of the growth stage companies will be able to relate to these challenges as well. They've raised, multiple rounds of funding. They have a meaningful amount of customers. They've been through renewal cycles, all of that kind of good stuff. For those who don't know, The Juice is a content platform. They connect B2B marketers with B2B content consumers. The easiest way to think about it in a short amount of time, Shantu, you can go to there you go. Is they're like Spotify, but for B2B content. Okay, next slide, please. Perfect. So here's kind of where the story starts. So despite that nice setup, it has not all been roses for The Juice. Q3 of 2022 was a very turbulent time for the company. They missed, effectively every major go-to-market goal, some of them by a huge margin. Churn in particular was through the roof. They missed their ARR targets. They missed their new members targets. And to make matters worse, cash was running out. And as Molly alluded to, the fundraising environment right now is about as bad as we've seen. So things really were not looking good, and The Juice had limited time to get it figured out.
One quick note here, something that we've talked about a lot is like how go-to-market is everything that we've discussed. And it also is really important that the relationship between marketing, sales, and success is really tight around your go-to-market like strategy and approach, because if marketing is like crushing it with a certain audience, but then it's not really that sticky of an audience for success, like your business is not going to be that healthy. And then if you have churn, that's a good indication that everything that happens before that might not be that great of a fit also. So good thing to keep in mind.
Yep. Yeah. And when we think about the makeup of a go-to-market organization, in most cases, it really is sales, marketing, and CS together. Mm-hmm. I think some people really consider go-to-market synonymous with sales, but I don't think that's really the right way to think about it. I think it's every single piece of the company that's involved in getting your product into the hands of a customer and making that customer successful and ultimately renew.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
So, yeah, Rob, that yours was pretty dang close. 6 months or so later, The Juice is in a much different, much more positive situation. So their story is really all about getting the fundamentals right. You're not going to hear any hacks in this story. They don't find some magical way to generate all of the leads that they want. They don't design a new sales deck intro that magically convinces every person to buy. They got close to their customers. They listened to their customers. They focused on the basics, and they made really fast, really methodical progress. So with that, let's jump in.
Awesome. So this is the story of how The Juice turned things around. So again, we mentioned that they had a pretty bad Q3. So on the second day of Q4, their CEO, Jonathan Gandalf, rounded up the company to address the problems. They took stock of what was working, what wasn't working, and then sought to align the team and come up with a game plan. And I think that the thing to highlight here is that both parts are really important. I'm sure many, if not all of us, have participated in some sort of exercise to address certain problems in the org. But it's that part mixed with the actual plan to take action that was really great on the Juice's part. So it looked like a typical brainstorming session. There was a lot of Post-it notes, a lot of whiteboarding, nothing incredibly complex, just the team and their thoughts. And again, if you look at the slide, I mean, there's a lot more on the what's not working part than on the what's working. So clearly the frustration was felt across the organization. With each part of the journey, we're going to go through a couple of lessons just to make sure that there are some key insights to glean from each section. So if you go to the next slide, Chantal. Thanks. Just a couple of lessons here is that first, don't let the go-to-market problems drag out. While it was pretty obvious for the Juice that they needed to change something, indicators might not be as obvious at every organization and software company. Chantal, I think you brought up some good ones in the earlier slide of like, it might feel like a customer success problem. It might also feel like a marketing problem. It might feel like a sales problem. And oftentimes, if that compounds where everyone is feeling frustrated, then you might need to revisit some of these foundational elements. So yeah, the second lesson is to be direct with sales and marketing challenges. Can you go back up to the other slide? Sorry. Yeah, just be direct with sales and marketing challenges. Again, that frustration, I think of it a little bit like if anyone's been part of a losing sports team, it's like not only are you winning, but everyone is mad at each other, So it's like the same in an organization. If everyone's not feeling successful or momentum, then again, you're probably going to have a ton of Post-it notes in that on that section that says not working. And then the last one is that, and this is again alluded to by Egan, but the answer is oftentimes in sight or it's internal. So a lot of times our gut is to be like, if only we had this new hire or this role filled, then everything would get easier. But oftentimes, again, it's about looking inside first for the answers. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Egan to talk you through what we mean.
Yeah, so I mentioned getting close to customers was an important component of how the Juice got things turned around. And Molly made me do this section because this is like literally probably the thing that I say the most, like to our studio companies, is like, how many customers are you talking to? Are you talking to customers? Are you asking them the right questions? It's just so important. Like sometimes I even say like 90% plus of the answers that you're looking for regarding your go-to-market are currently known by a customer if you ask them, or if you ask them the right question. So another little audience participation, drop in the chat if you talk to one or more customers per week on average, and tell us about how many you think you talk to per week. When things got tough for the Juice, this is one of the first projects that they activated. They interviewed active customers, churned prospects, really anyone who had been close to their business as a customer, potential buyer. Their CEO, Jonathan, also launched a campaign to interview 50 marketers over the course of Q4. So think more like would-be prospects. And they outlined a few key learning areas for the research. So they wanted to revisit assumptions about key pain points. They wanted to understand how the changing economy was impacting their customers' jobs, their goals, their budgets, their focus areas for 2023. And ultimately, this research helped amass a huge amount of information that was used to implement many of the changes that we're going to talk about. So some key lessons: nothing is more important than staying in sync with your customers. That sounds obvious. I come from a marketing background. I didn't talk to one customer a week. It's hard if it's not a part of your kind of on paper job description. Like an account executive talks to customers all day. That's just what they do. A customer success person talks to customers all day. I think marketers have to take that extra step to make sure that that's happening. I think always be willing to revisit past assumptions. That openness was what kind of facilitated good research for the juice. They weren't going in trying to prove themselves right. They were going in trying to actually learn and understand how customer behavior was changing, how customer needs were changing. And similarly, go-to-market fit, which is a term we use, kind of product market fit, but more on the sales marketing CS side, it's temporary. So is product market fit, by the way, but you have to be always assessing, asking questions, and paying attention to, headwinds, tailwinds, how things are changing and tweaking as needed.
Clint dropped a really good question in the chat, which is, what if your customers of the past are not your customers of the future? And I think that's basically what we're talking about, which is like, you can have kind of an initial wave of success with a certain audience, with a certain offering, but like that is not a forever scenario. And if the market changes, your go-to-market has to change. So yeah, do you want to elaborate on that a little bit? I think it's such a good point.
Yeah, I'm glad to. It is a great point. And that's why with the juice, we structured the research so that some of it was focused on active customers who were paying us money, but they also were talking to, churned customers. They were talking to prospects that had fallen out of the sales funnel. And then Jonathan's just general 50 conversations with marketers was all about just, hey, I'm going to test new things. I'm going to talk to new personas. I'm going to try new messaging. And so it was really the synthesis of all three of those efforts that led to where the juice ultimately landed. But I think the key point is talk to customers, but also talk to the market generally, even if some of those people don't represent past customers.
There are some really good questions in the chat, if you can see it, Egan.
Yeah, I can see
about
it.
How to start talking to customers, like how do you get your foot in the door? Yeah, if you want to just take a look. And
Yep. So I think getting executive blessing to do this. So CEO or CRO says, yes, this is a good idea and I support it. And then working with CSMs to get on a cadence. If we're talking about specific customers or active customers, working with CSMs to get on a cadence. And, even if you have, hopefully you have hundreds of customers, but even if you have 20 or 30 and your goal is to talk to one per week, you're only talking to one person from each customer, twice a year or something like that. So the point is we're not asking to be on every single CSM call. We're just asking to, every now and then put a marketer in front of a customer. The other thing I've found a really easy place to get started is with recently lost deals. Account executives typically they don't care because they lost the deal. So, give them a $25 or a $50 gift card, offer that to the prospect and do a sort of exit interview. That I find that's a really good way to get some feedback as well.
we've also talked before, Egan, about having like a customer advisory board, which doesn't necessarily need to be made of just customers. You can also have kind of like aspirational prospects involved. And I think people feel excited to be on something like that and excited to be like part of the business that you're building. So that kind of helps with the getting over the hurdle of them making time for you.
Yep, definitely. Sean, so I think we'll keep rolling. Do you want to take notice some of the good ones and we'll try and get back to them if we have time?
Yep.
Cool.
Awesome. Okay, so the juice, they realized something was wrong. They talked to a bunch of customers, and then they had an assumption about how to adjust their messaging and move forward. So I actually love this part of the story for a number of reasons. The first one is because I work on messaging and positioning with all of our new companies, and something we preach when we go through this initial exercise is that it should and it will be revisited. Too often we sort of put messaging in this bucket of a set it and forget it type of mindset, but the juice took the information from all of their customer conversations that they had and refined it based on real data that was largely driven again by things that were pretty unforeseeable from day one, things like market changes and conditions. They can't control that, and they can't control how their customers are going to react to those things. All they can do is basically make sure that they stay close to them so that when behaviors do start to change, that they're really in tune with the pain points that their customers are feeling. The second reason I love this is because they actually had the courage to change the thing. So they, from the get-go, said that their big value drivers were not going to be ROI and lead generation. So if you can imagine starting a company and being like, there's a lot of unknowns, but one thing I know for sure right now is that we don't want to lean in here. And then being open-minded enough to revisit that assumption and experiment with this particular value driver is just like, I give the juice major props. And it is what sort of propelled them to success in Q4. All right, so I think I saw some questions that started to hint on this, but how to test a new messaging angle. So you don't want to they had this assumption that ROI and lead gen is going to be the thing, but they didn't just immediately start rolling that out across their entire customer journey. So to make sure that it's right, you need to validate it. And this isn't totally rocket science. It's mostly just talking to people, low risk stakeholders, and early stage and late stage prospects. Again, there's no silver bullet to this. It's just about gathering validation that the new messaging does address a big pain point for a very specific audience, and that people would be willing to actually spend money to solve this problem. The last thing too is conversations versus surveys. I know that a lot of validation, you can also rely on surveys. And I think that they're really great to augment the conversations that you're having with real customers, but don't skip on the actual customer conversations. Again, it's really great to do validation with like conversations plus surveys, but the real gold is in those handful of conversations. So we definitely recommend talking to customers. So then they actually had conviction that this was the right way to shift their messaging. And I think this is a really good example of how they did it. So the website at the end of Q3 really focused on one audience that was just members of the Juice. So as you remember, the Juice is kind of like Spotify or Netflix for marketing professionals. So they have like the brands who are putting their content on the Juice, and then they have marketing and sales professionals who are digesting and consuming content on the Juice. And so initially they thought that like this was the play. They were going to make sure that their homepage just spoke to the people who they wanted to consume content on the Juice, but they totally like flipped that through these conversations. So as you can see today, they shifted it to their new value driver of proving the ROI of your content program. So again, they didn't just immediately come to this conclusion and then update everything, but they got validation, and then they started to make these like small tweaks throughout the entire customer journey in all of their touch points that led to really, really big results.
We have a quick question in the chat about the change of the website. So is the change in the homepage more on the lines of don't sell what you do, sell the benefits? I think the big point here is that the benefits that they're selling totally changed, right?
It was actually a mix. It was the actual target buyer and also the benefits associated with those.
Yeah.
And one thing that Egan and I talked about too is they were pretty specific with going after members. And actually, because of that, they realized that it was wrong faster. If you are super generic all the time, it can be really, really hard to figure out like what specifically is not working. If you do pick a lane and go after it and are open to changing, you'll fail a little bit faster for sure. So yeah, it was a mixture of yes, leading with the value driver and thinking about like what actual value the features of the product are giving to the audience, but also like rethinking which audience you're prioritizing sort of a little bit above the other. Because odds are you probably have like a lot of different buyers who matter, but you kind of have to pick the most important one. All right, so some quick lessons. And I'll breeze through these because I want to make sure that we get to everything. But get validation before rolling out messaging across channels. Don't skip on the conversations. Messaging should never be just a set it and forget it endeavor. It's never finished. And then again, it's okay to revisit big things. So in the Juices case, they said they weren't going to lean into ROI and lead gen. And then they shifted, they listened to the market. And actually that doesn't just show that that wasn't just like the right decision or the smart decision, but actually shows their own audience, marketers, that they're good at their jobs, right? They're marketers creating software for marketers, and they're listening to their audience and responding in a way that is really, really smart.
Okay, another section here. So for the juice, like the main idea was that less is more. So when I was interviewing their team, it was constantly emphasized that like these changes to go-to-market fundamentals were not about adding new stuff. It was about identifying what in the business was really working and then shining a spotlight on those things. Molly already walked you through some of the website and messaging details about how they did that, but kind of radically slimming down the site and positioning more around ROI and more to the demand gen buyer were important components of their success. And it wasn't just at the top of the funnel where they made those changes. They carried it through, kind of all the way through the key customer touch points along the buying journey. They also really focused on the buyer profile. So as a two-sided business, this meant a couple of things. One, where the original messaging was really focused on the members or the content consumers and the buyer, they really fine-tuned things to focus on the buyer. And then within the full marketing org, they got more focused around this demand generation persona. So just, you can kind of see how they're going from really broad and kind of chunking it down and getting more specific, which ultimately help create these go-to-market efficiencies. Next slide. This is a tangible example where they really emphasized what was working. So on the left is a portion of one of their old proposals from Q3. You can see it's basically a few software line items and then a list of included features. It's not the worst proposal that I've ever seen, but it's not a particularly good one. It's kind of vague and generalized. There's nothing that's really emphasized. It's not really wrapped around benefits. And on the right side, you can see a more recent proposal. So ultimately, this is for the same product effectively, but just notice how subtle changes highlight key components of the Juice's new fundamentals. So promotional partnership is called out. This is something that they learned from their customer interviews. The customers really liked kind of the promotional advantages of the Juice, special placement of content, all that kind of stuff. So they really call this out now when they're asking for the order. And then under platform partnership, there's really three key themes: discoverability, distribution, and data. And these were built really based off of what the demand gen marketers were asking for. That whole kind of section reads demand gen marketer, distribution, lead gen, data, ROI. Those are the types of themes that are laced in. And the conversion rate on the new proposal has been, night and day compared to what they used to put in front of prospects. And I think this is a really good example because it kind of emphasizes our point of, we're not talking all the time about drastic changes. I mean, this document stayed largely the same from a structure standpoint. They just, really paid attention to what their customers were asking for and then made some changes and some tweaks within the copy. And it's made really all the difference. So some key lessons, Chantal, if you go to the next slide, instinct is always to add, but the answer to efficiency more times than not is actually to remove or to rearrange or to shed light on something that's really working. Highlight customer value every chance you get. That's kind of a no-brainer, but it is when you're really focusing on it, you can always find opportunities to highlight value to the customer and specifically the buyer. And then, as Molly's kind of talked about a few times, commit and move forward. The worst go-to-market strategy is a vague, generalized, vanilla strategy. Pick a lane, do your research, but then pick a lane and really go after it. Okay. Coming into the home stretch here. So another area was around that they made changes was the target persona. Again, what they learned through interviews and kind of intuited through some of the losses in Q3 was that budget and priorities were shifting. The budget for something like the juice was actually more under the demand generation team or a comparable function, whatever you call it in your organization, instead of the content or the brand marketing team where the juice had some initial success. And this was becoming evident in the pipeline. It was becoming evident in deals that were progressing. If demand gen was attached to the deal, they were closing at a much higher rate than if demand gen wasn't. So that was kind of a major cue to the juice that they needed to take a closer look at this persona. And again, not drastic changes. They leaned into messaging that was already working, but they just really kind of carved that out and lifted it up and made it sort of the centerpiece of their website and of their sales collateral and of their storytelling. And it's made a big difference. And so a couple of lessons: be mindful of budget. The best solution is irrelevant for a customer that can't afford to pay for it. You need to follow the budget to some extent within reason. And then, follow the tracks. If a new buyer is obviously emerging, pay attention to that and be willing to make changes. It's a bit of a fine line because you don't want, if a new exciting title fills out your top of funnel lead gen form, don't turn the ship on a whim and start targeting that. But if you're seeing multiple deals that are moving through the pipeline and landing in closed one, and there's something new or something that catches your eye about the personas or the types of companies that are attached, that's definitely something to pay attention to. And then lastly, one of my favorite examples here, after all of this, the juice was able to increase their price by 20 to 50%, again, for virtually the same solution. And why is that? It's much easier to be crisp and clear it's much easier to command a higher price point when you're crisp and clear with your messaging, when you're crisp and clear with who you're targeting, when the customer believes that what you're building is just for them. And it's also easier to actually create value for those customers too. Again, if you're spread thin across all kinds of different customers and people, are you actually going to be able to do the best job for those customers when they all look different or when you're not clear on who your customer is? So I think this is a really important point too. When all these fundamentals are sound, you can go in confidently and ask for that kind of higher price tag. Few lessons learned here. Average contract value is a super important efficiency lever. We talked a lot about conversion rates, but price can make a huge impact on bottom line revenue. Be confident in what you're selling and ask for the price that you're worth. That's much easier to do when you and your team feel confident in who you're targeting, what you're saying to them, how you're positioned against competitors, etc. And also don't let tough times drag you down. I know not every company is competing in a tough market right now, but many of us are. Don't be discouraged. There is budget. Customers are still, spending money. It might just require revisiting some of these fundamentals, thinking about how you position yourself within the challenging kind of market, and sometimes even making a shift on who the customer is. Lastly, did it work? The short answer is yes. The juice would not let me share specific numbers despite me crying about it. But you'll just have to trust me. I mean, they shattered their previous ARR record, and the change happened over the course of just one quarter. So, really quickly going from like worst quarter ever to best quarter ever. And they attribute really all of it to just kind of revisiting and getting these fundamentals right. They're charging more. They're selling faster, sales cycles are way down. And it's even working on the member side, the content reader side. January, they added more members than they did in all of Q3 combined. So really, really promising results. And just some final thoughts here. There's so much abundance in the ethos of SaaS. It's all about grow. It's all about add more. It's all about build new features. It's all about new. And I think there's a time and a place for all of that stuff. But, the things that are going to move the needle in a big way are getting these fundamentals right. And a lot of times it's about deciding as much what you don't want to be and who you don't want to be for, as it is about deciding what you want to be and who you are for. Molly did a really nice job laying this one out, but like a lot of times what you're looking for is already in your orbit. It's already known. It's already some piece of your business that's working, and just going in and highlighting that and really lifting that element or those elements up can make a huge difference versus trying to just slap a bunch of new stuff onto something that, isn't working or isn't working maybe as well as it could. And then lastly, just I think it's so important to always operate with a high sense of urgency. So like we said, the Juice made these changes over the course of a quarter. So from close of business on the last day of Q3, when everything was going terribly, to close a business on the last day of Q4, where they had their best quarter by far across every measure. I mean, they were making changes within the first few weeks of that quarter in order for that to happen. And so don't be discouraged when things are going poorly. It can change very, very quickly, but, operate with a high sense of urgency, be lean, be scrappy, all that kind of stuff will pay dividends. Real quick, since we just talked about the Juice, if you're interested in learning more, if you want to get on the platform for free as a member, feel free to do that. And if you're interested about learning more about their tools for marketers, do that as well. Just go ahead and check out the site, thejuicehq.com. And Chantal, I am sorry, but I'm not sure we left much room for questions here.
That's okay. We answered a ton of them throughout. Thank you both so much. This has been a really, really fantastic session, really great way to kick off the summit. And then what I'll leave the audience with is just, we're launching a weekly workshop series that's starting next week. The first topic is about future-proofing your SEO in the age of AI. So feel free to register at demandwall.com/SGW. Wow, really hard to say. Thank you all for joining. Thank you, Egan. Thank you, Molly. This was fantastic.